Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled to be today with Peter Block, who's calling in from Cincinnati, Ohio. And in a few moments, we're going to get started, but we want to make sure that many of you can join us before we begin. And I already see many of you coming. As you're arriving, I hope you'll take a moment to get acquainted with the chat window. We would love to invite you throughout today's event to share your questions, your comments, your insights, your reflections. And based on the number of registrants we have for today's event, I believe that chat may be going very quickly, but we will take a look at that later if you don't get a response from us here. The other thing I want to let you know is that Peter has invited us to be messy today. And what that means is that we want to invite some of you on camera later to talk with Peter, to share your insights. And if you have your camera and your audio ready, or even just your audio, we will be inviting some of you who want to raise your hand to have a chance to interact directly with Peter Block today. So welcome to those of you who are letting us know where you're calling in from. I'm seeing an international audience already, New Jersey, California, South Africa. Peter, your fan club in South Africa says hello. We have folks in London, in Massachusetts, in British Columbia, in beautiful Muskegon, Michigan. I wish I were there. In Wisconsin, in Columbia, New York City, Oslo, more in the UK, Cleveland, Ohio. These are all faster than I can read. And we are honored and privileged to have you with us today. You are a very important part of this conversation, and we're thrilled that you're joining. In the event that you have a question later on in today's event and you'd like to speak directly to Peter, we're going to ask you to use the hand raise function so that it can be a bit easier for us to invite you on camera with us. So again, welcome to all who are coming in. Thanks to all of you who are sharing with us about where you are. Again, it's moving so fast, I can barely read it. We are recording today's event. So in the event that you would like to share this with colleagues or you can't stay for the entire event, you will be able to watch later. I have a question from Nicholas wondering if anyone else from Australia is here. Wow, not sure what time it is in Australia, but amazing. It is so exciting to have so many of you joining us. If any of you would like to participate via social media and share some insights or ideas there, you can use today the hashtag community. You may or may not know that we are here today in part to celebrate the launch of the new edition of Community by Peter Block. And like many of you, I am a super fan of Peter Block. I was first acquainted with his work back in 2014, I believe, when the second edition of Stewardship was released, and we were able to have a webinar together for that book's release. It's tremendous and amazing. I actually was explaining the book to someone over the weekend, Peter, and forgive me in my fangirl-ishness, but I called the book exquisite. So those of you who are here, if you have a favorite Peter Block title in your library, feel free to type in and share that with us. So for those of you who are fans of Peter Block, he may need no introduction today, but to pause for just a moment, he is an author of so many books that have influenced people across the globe. He is a citizen of Cincinnati, Ohio. He's a partner and a founder of Design Learning. And Peter, along the way, if you want to share with us about that. Looks like people like the answer to how is yes, community, flawless consulting, abundant community, more for the answer to how is yes. And I don't know if I dare ask you, Peter, which of your titles is your favorite. It's like asking which of your children is your favorite.
You know, anyway, thank you for having me. And those of you showing up, I see a lot of friends in these little boxes. And Sarah in Calgary. In a way, my favorite is probably the ones that have the largest audience. Because, you know, you're writing a book, you don't know, I don't even know what the book is about until I finish writing it. And you write a book to exercise ideas out of my body so there's space for something else. And so, but the books that have an audience means it's touched a nerve. And I think with my writing, I'm not encumbered by evidence or data. The Empowered Manager reviewer said there's not one bit of evidence for anything Block says about empowerment. And I just wrote back, I said, good point. You know, and so I did them all for a reason, and I'm grateful that there has been an audience. The last one I wrote is called Another Kingdom, and it's about departing the consumer culture. And it was exciting. I got invited to do a class at a business school here. So here I'm arguing against consumerism, and the business school is interested. So little things like that.
Well, that's a good segue because today we're here to talk all about community. And I hope that you can get us started, Peter, by talking to us about why community matters.
You know, it surprises me. One, I think we're more isolated than ever. You know, I think the digital world is a deeply useful and isolating effect. And I think we've reached a limit as to what professionals can do. The book, in some ways, is an argument for a change in narrative. And the narrative we're living in now is there's something wrong with us. And I watch the news and I find out what bad happened. And so the dominant narrative is there's something wrong with us. And we need to outsource. I need to get children to the schools to raise my children. I need police to keep me safe. I need doctors to keep me healthy. None of those things are true. The schools cannot raise our children. Doctors do not keep me healthy. So what does? Well, it's my social capital, my connectedness. Turns out if I join an association, just one, I'm going to live a year longer. What are you talking about? And so I think there's an accumulating awareness and desperation in a way that says if we can get connected, we can be safer, we can raise our children. I think most businesses, with the joys of remote work and the freedom that I can now be in my pajamas and nobody will know, there's a loneliness, and a lot of companies now are saying we've got to bring people together on a regular basis because without being in the room together, we're senseless. It's nonsense way of being together. And then the community world is just, the economy is kind of not working well. You know, every time I read about the great growth rate and the great GNP, I know that everybody's wages are on their way down. I know my kids are not going to make as much money as I did. You know, all the dreams we had, I know my house is not going to appreciate like it once did as a major source of wealth accumulation for America. And so what do I do about that? And I think people are realizing that organizing, getting connected with other people in a place not too far away and talking about what do we want to create together, okay, is community. And that community is becoming more practical, not just pleasurable. And that's my fantasy about the interest and why it matters. And I believe it because I make Cincinnati my project. I just had to stop traveling. And it was hard because I got downgraded on my premium status with Delta. So now when I fly, it's awful. It's an existential crisis for me. But when you decide whatever I'm looking to do in the world, I can probably do it within reach. I don't have to go everywhere to find it. Then you realize that the foundational work is for you and I to get connected before we talk about bricks and mortar and budget and speed and scale and all these things. And so I think that's what the book is. It offers these abstract ideas and a very practical, concrete ways that people can get connected fast to do more together.
Wow. So as I was reading the book, Peter, one thing that stood out to me was this idea that you have that the way to change the community is to change the conversation. So when you started your comments, you were mentioning the defining narrative currently is so bleak. So can you talk to me about some ways that you've seen people changing conversations and as a result, changing communities or creating community?
You know, it's worse than bleak. It's the belief that problem solving is why we're here. The belief that we can't have a meeting without leaving with a list. You know, somebody at the door will be watching. You have to show your list like you do at security at the airport. And so the shift is to choose, to decide that we're here to imagine an alternative future. And we won't find that future by doing more diagnosis, you know, Cincinnati's done 17 studies of racism over the last 15 years, 18 years. Every one they found the same thing. We have a problem with racism. Well, none of that does anything about it. And so you start to say, well, let's get together and talk about what do we want to create together. What's the possibility? What's the crossroads we're at this stage of our work? What doubts do I have about what I'm involved in? What's a yes? And so the book kind of outlines 6 conversations. I asked Marv Weisford, he had the 6-box theory. I said, Marv, why didn't you have 7 boxes? And he says, I couldn't remember 7. I can only remember 6. So I have 6 conversations as a testimony to the limitations of memory. But basically, all these conversations, if I decide to have them together with each other, take us to a different place. If I ask you, what's the commitment you're willing to make with no expectation of return? In that question, I have put barter to sleep. I have put to bed the idea, quid pro quo, what's in it for me, entitlement. I've taken that whole body of language that we're used to inside organizations and I say, let's let that rest in peace. I want to know what's the promise you're willing to make related to why we're here. It could be a business or a neighborhood or this show. What's the promise you're willing to make without any expectation of return? And the first response is, that's not what I came for. I came to make a deal. Well, making a deal does not create an alternative future. Lawyers, accountants, barter, God bless them. But it doesn't create a tomorrow different, distinct from today. Problem solving doesn't create a distinction of tomorrow versus yesterday. It just makes tomorrow slightly better. People come to all kinds of events, and I never ask people, what do you want? I never say, what are your expectations out of this webinar? Because I know they're too small. Well, I like to pick up a couple of tools. You know, or I'd like to get some techniques. And the God, you know, it's too small a God to worship. Methodology is too small a God. Of course you need methodology. Before methodology, you have to say, what's the crossroads we're at? What's the point? What's the promise? What's the doubt? What's the yes you no longer mean? So all these questions open worlds. And what I do is take the notion that in a world there's a word is a world, and I make it concrete. I know that these questions, if you take any 2 of them, anytime, you're going to connect with the people around you differently than you imagined when you walked in the room. And, you know, let me stop, but I can give examples of that. And wherever you are, every room you're in is an opportunity. I don't care who, to build community and create an alternative future.
So commitment is one of those 6 powerful conversations that you outline in the book. Would you be willing to share more of them with us? I see that Luke is commenting that although he often uses a problem as an excuse to get people together, when he brings them together, he navigates those 6 conversations with them.
And Luke should be on this program instead of me. Exactly.
We can invite him.
No, he said it perfectly. You know, problems are an excuse. You need a cover story to get us in the room. You need to promise. All marketing is pornography. And so Thursday, I'm doing a webinar on flawless consulting. And I said, what do you want to call it? I said, well, the 3 keys to business partnering. I don't know what the hell 3 keys to business. I don't care if you know or not. We need the number 3 to market. And so now once you're in the room, we can do anything together we want. That's why we don't use PowerPoint, because PowerPoint pretends that our conversation is predictable. Why would we spend our time knowing, you know, there's themes that I'm going to talk, I only have a couple of ideas, so it's not like I'm going anywhere. But the idea to lay them out to make it easy doesn't go deep enough. And so what are your expectations? I'm not interested. I want to know what's the world you came here to create. And these are some of the other questions, you know, what's the yes you no longer mean? What the hell are you talking about? Get out of my face. This is not therapy. I know it's not therapy. We're friends now. Therapists are paid friends, basically. All right. Community allows you to save money on therapy. It's a cost-saving device. Okay. And community means getting connected with people over time to both learn how to trust and be intimate with each other in service of what do we want to create, what's the world we want to inhabit together. And then there is a place for problem solving after we get connected. So it's connection first and then content.
So what's the fastest way for people to connect, Peter?
Sit in a group of 3 with their knees less than 9 inches from each other, so people can't lean back and show me what you got. I didn't come here to show you what I got. And ask people to answer one of these questions. Why was it important for you to be here today? Beautiful question. If I can answer why I showed up today, then I have a clue as to why I'm on Earth. Ask what the best one is, what's the crossroads you're at this stage of your life? And it's an argument against Disney. It's an argument against the North Star. It's acknowledging life is messy. That's why you're doing a messy program. To be alive and you can take it anywhere. You know, I was very influenced by Christopher Alexander, who's an architect. And he wrote something called The Timeless Way of Building. He just flipped my brain about space. And he said, every room, does it have a quality of aliveness or not? And most of the rooms don't. Most of them are designed for air control, environmental friendliness. You know, I was giving a talk last week to a group doing the Enneagram. These are alive, vibrant people who want to make a difference. We're sitting in a room with not one living thing, not one painting, not one picture. It's a hotel room. It's a Westin. And so Alexander taught me that dead spaces create lousy outcomes. And so you have live spaces. Even you, look at behind you, you've got books, for God's sake. You know, a lot of people want to clean, you know. So Alexander's taught me a lot. Daniel Bornstein taught me that every project that starts with some good funding and good blueprints and a desire for scale fails. Well, what are you talking about? It's all I do is dream at night. It's great funding and clear direction. And he says, when you start with that, it's deadening. So you should be underfunded. You should move slow and don't worry about how big you are. And if you do that and create something with a root, with a depth, and so community is a methodology for doing that. So as soon as we sit down, we say, what's the crossroads you're at this stage of your life? And you don't have to answer, but it honors the importance of your choicefulness. And so all these questions are ways of opening the possibility of giving people some freedom, let them come closer to each other, even though they didn't come for that, and be accountable for my life. The tragedy of the dominant narrative is we're waiting for someone else's transformation. It's not what Trump does, it's the fact that we find him interesting. It's not what the leader of your company does, it's the fact that you want to know. I've been in meetings where the leader got called out and had a big sigh. Like, I'll be back in a minute. And all we talked about is what was he upset about? Why did we waste time? The guy wasn't even in the room anymore. And so all of these questions are assaults on accountability and saying, well, you and I right now are creating, you know, the world we want to inhabit. And that's why we're doing it this way. And it'll always be flawed. But so what? That's the nice thing about getting old. You realize you're not going to get any better.
Wow, that's a hard thing to realize, huh?
It's such a relief, you know. And so I can exhale once in a while. As long as I don't. You know.
So lots of questions coming in.
Okay.
But
why don't you just ask some and I'll answer them.
Yeah, I'll ask some. I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about why small groups are so important. There were a couple of comments that came in and, you know, someone's calling out, hey, you know, in some cultures, physical proximity is uncomfortable. So talk to us a little bit more about why you feel those aspects are so important for helping people connect.
That's a great question. And every culture I know values depth. They value depth of relationship. And the small group is the quickest way I can realize I'm not alone. And we do this in every country, you know, whether it's Asia and China and Singapore. And everybody says, well, I'm not saying you have to touch anybody, but there is no culture alive that doesn't want to get more connected with the people around. And so these are a quick way to do it. So I ignore all the cultural admonitions. So people don't want, America is the hardest place to do this work in the world. We think we know it. We're arrogant. We think we got it together. I don't need a small group. Come on, man. I came for a keynote. I want my keynote. Where's my keynote? I want my mommy. I want my keynote.
Where's my PowerPoint, Peter?
Where's my PowerPoint? What is the touchy-feely crap? What is this stuff? And I just say, good point. I know why you came. Now break into a small group. And get in a small group with a stranger. You know, as a culture, we're imagining building walls. Really? I thought the Berlin Wall coming down was something to celebrate, and we're going to build one? And we're afraid of the stranger. And I'm not talking about politics. I'm not talking about leadership. I'm just saying we become afraid of the stranger. And so the only place surprise and community occurs is when you're sitting near a stranger. If I'm with like-minded people, I'm never going to be surprised. And I hate that it's so successful, because every time I buy something online and they show me people like you also bought this, I look and I say, hey, that's pretty cool. I'll take that. You know, so it's very powerful. And so the protocol for a small group community, small group transformation is be with people you know the least. Sit less than 9 inches away, and if you're from a culture where that's too close, then sit 9.5 inches away. Because without that engagement, community and real change can't happen. It can't happen. And there's too much suffering. And then another protocol that's even more radical is don't be helpful to each other. If the book's anything, it's a cry out against help, against charity, against philanthropy, against the idea that I know and you don't. So stop being helpful. For most of us, well what am I going to do? And being helpful is just a form of colonialism. It's a form of saying, I know and you don't. Don't ever tell anybody what you did at their age, for God's sake. Mostly because whatever you did, obviously, it didn't work that well, because look at you now. You know, it's just a funny kind of boasting. It's that, hey, let me tell you how I got here. I didn't get here. You know, I had a birthday yesterday. And, I didn't, you know, how did you get there? I'm not anywhere. You know, nobody's made it, you know. And so don't be helpful. Instead, be curious. Ask people, what does that matter to you? What does that mean to you? And those conversations under those conditions with the stranger, with the 9 inches, with the not help curiosity, they bring people together in 8 minutes. You know, I've done it 1,000 times, and half the people watching have done it. Everybody I know on this list does it better than I do. I get lazy at times. And I know that if you do that and ask people what struck you after that small group conversation with strangers, they say, well, I got to know these people much faster than I could have imagined. And why do you do that? Well, we're not here for therapy. It's not a social event. We're here to recreate the world. But I can't recreate the world with strangers. I can't recreate the world unless I realize I'm not alone in this endeavor. And most of the 3,500 or 4,000 ads have nothing to do with that. They're making me as an individual more responsive to God, or more beautiful, or more powerful, or more sexual, or something more convenient life, none of which will make a difference. And so that's the business case for the community foolishness.
So a couple of people have given a thumbs up to this question that came from Harrison. What is the biggest challenge when facilitating small groups? People
for me, is to facilitate as little as possible. Maria Montessori said the hardest thing in training Montessori teachers was to have them stop teaching. I never facilitate and sit in on a small group, unless I'm just lonely. So if I got 12 people in the room and I break them into 4 groups of 3, or I've got 600 in the room and I break them, let them be. Give them the ground rules. And it's hard to keep your hands off and have faith, but you also don't want to put up with people who came to make speeches. So sometimes people will capture the microphone because they came to make a speech. You need a way that's comfortable for you. I'm aggressive. So I just say, when they start and I know it's a speech, I say, hey, you said this before. I said, yes. I said, well, that's good. Thank you. How long is it going to take? And so you try to mitigate against people using your room, especially in the community work. In organizations, it's not so bad because everybody's nervous. And so the decorum is nicer and they show up on time. But the hardest thing in facilitation, one, is to trust the language of the questions. So you got to make distinctions, and it drives me crazy training people to do this work. And I'll say, okay, ask them, why was it important for you to come here today? All right. And they get up and say, okay, the first question is, what do you expect to get out of this webinar?
That's a different question.
It's a different world. And then I sit in the back of the room and go get a glass of water and calm down. The problem with this methodology, it's too simple. It's just too simple. You need 10 minutes of context. All right, here's what I have in mind. Here's why I called you together. Here's what we're trying to do. And you break them into small groups. One of the most vivid, and sometimes it takes courage to do that. I've been in very tightly packed churches, and I say, how am I going to break them into small groups? The pews are nailed down. And I'm sitting there thinking, just forget it, Peter. Give your damn speech and walk off the stage. And then I think, you coward. And you can do all this while you're talking. Okay? And so I just say, break into groups of 3. And find 2 people you don't know. Don't wait to be chosen. Don't be helpful to each other. And I'm going like this. And the next thing I look up, they've taken over the church. And so just having faith of rearranging the room and asking people to engage this way when you haven't been authorized to do it. I gave a talk at the Organization Development Network, and you think this would be a group-oriented gang. They call and say, Peter, you and Peter Kestem are giving a talk. Don't ask your questions. Don't break us into small groups. We want content. And I didn't say anything. I thought, how can you have learning if all you have is content? I mean, you got to decide, you're here to teach, you're here to learn. And I just got up there and did it anyway. I was asked not to break people in small groups. But we have to do that because this is not going to mean anything. I'm not a small group guy. I'm the biggest loner that ever lived. Leave me alone, for God's sake. On my tombstone, finally, alone at last, is my epitaph. Okay, but I know that if people don't engage, they're not going to learn nothing, and they're going to leave this room as alone and isolated. And when you're isolated, 3 things happen to you. You begin to think there's something wrong with it, because the dominant narrative seems so pervasive. What's the matter with me? And you begin to think you're crazy, and you begin to think, I'm in it alone. And so the work of the group, of the community, is to tell people you're not crazy, all right? And you're not alone. And there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have to work on your deficiencies, because working on deficiencies makes them stronger. So, answering questions you're not asking.
No,
that's what I do.
Yeah, it's powerful. So Jeff is wondering, when you're in these small group discussions, how honesty and genuineness come into play. Do you find that that's a barrier when you're wanting to convene small groups?
It's always a barrier. And that's why you do it. To get people to trust each other. And you ask them questions that are ambiguous and personal and anxiety-provoking. And of course I don't trust a stranger. Of course I walk in the room wondering, what the hell am I doing here? But with a little bit of context, 10 minutes of here's why we're doing it. Once people get in a small group and you give them the question stated precisely and pray and ask them, don't be helpful, they begin to trust each other. Right? Trust may be the point, but you don't build trust by talking about building trust. You can't market trust. And truth is just such an illusion. People say, I'm telling truth to power. Really? Is how you see the world really truth? And if that's so, then you're caught up in an ideology. What's killing us is ideology. Ideology is the belief that the way I see the world is true. And so you say, why is the world so at odds with each other? Why is the dominant narrative so contentious? Well, it's because, people are caught up in certainty. That's why the democracy is at risk right now. It's not because of one side or the other is wrong. It's just that we're only interested in certainty, and we act as what we have to say is true. It's not true. It's just something that came out of my mouth, out of my mind. And so it's hard. If people don't trust each other, that's why you build community. And I'm not interested in their stories of why they haven't trusted each other. I'm on a neighborhood council now, and everybody's got 5, 10, 15-year-old stories about what a contentious neighborhood this is. And remember the fight we had over blocking off a street. And remember the fight we had over where the light. They're caught up in these things. And those people are I just ignore it. I say, okay, that's interesting. So what are we doing here? And people get into arguments at the meetings. They say, do you think your argument is going to take us anywhere? And they say, well, so why don't you have it someplace else? And you can shift and take the anger, dilute it out if you can name the process that's interfering with why we came. And then the hardest things for me is to not have opinions. So as a council person, it's a nightmare because I have to sit there and listen to all this stupid stuff, and act interested. I haven't done that since grade school. So these are.
So Sarah's wondering if we can talk about inviting people to recreate the world.
That's a nice thought. Yes, that may be the only reason to come together. Now, how you frame it will depend on where you are. I would rather recreate our world. I don't like the notion of leverage. Let's create a model so other cities can follow. Cities aren't watching. Nobody's watching. Your parents aren't even watching. So the idea of role model, let's create a model, a prototype. No, let's just create something that will keep us interested. So, but it's a beautiful question. What can we create? And it'll always be embedded in something concrete. We want to clean up the place. We want to stop drugs. We want kids to grow. We want to be safer. We want to be more, beauty in the world. I don't care what you're interested in. Like somebody said earlier, problems are, Luca thinks that problems are reasons people don't get it. So pick anything.
Used to get people in the room.
An excuse, yeah. That's what I learned from Jim Keane, a wonderful friend of mine. He says, just that. He said, problem solving. Give people an excuse to make connections. See, in the corporate world, in the business world, we think we have to get along, get the job done. And that's backwards. We have a job to do so we can learn to get along.
So many one-liners that I wish I were furiously copying them all down. I've seen some folks say that they're tweeting out some quotes, which are really helpful. We're going to very soon invite some friends onto the camera with us. Before we do so, Peter, a couple of people, more than a few, have asked about the second edition of the book and what's new and updated. And even though that might sound like a commercial, that is what we're being asked to share. So before we transition to having some folks on the call with us, could you share just a few high points about what's new about the new edition?
I tried to make it more accessible. Nothing is fundamentally new. If you have a copy, there's no real reason to buy a second one. All right? But I'm more confident in these ideas now than I was 8, 9, 10 years ago. And so I just tried to make the book more accessible, more clear, less ambivalent. I pulled out 40 pages of resources, because those are better found online now. And the examples I use are just so clear, so powerful. I just try to really bring it into HD, bring it into focus, and make it more accessible so that people entering the book won't have to wade through so much ambivalence. And then the other is just a need for it. I didn't know when I wrote that book that I knew that I wanted an alternative narrative. And I've been breaking people into small groups all my life. But I hadn't made the connection that if you do that, you get real concrete outcomes. And that's what this book can now claim. That if you do collaborative care, like Paul Ehrlich does, who's an example in the book, and stands everybody in a circle who's involved in my care. If he does that, which is a community strategy, not popular among physicians because it's not as efficient in everything. If you do that, morale goes up, the surgeon doesn't feel so exhausted, the patients stay in the hospital 4 fewer days than if you don't do that. And so to me, it's trying to connect real outcomes of a safe neighborhood, more powerful health care, children learning faster, economies that are local and more balanced and less centralized are all based on the idea of community. And that's why we did the book, was try to tighten it up and stuff. But the basic 6 conversations are still there. So
hopefully that's helpful. And someone was asking, is the book from 2018? Yes, the second edition came out just a couple of weeks ago. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, a few hours ago.
A few hours
ago. It's hard to know when a book comes out because it's hard copy long before it's the pub date. But
Indeed. Is the pub date this week, Peter? Is that coinciding with your birthday?
I don't know. No, I would never exploit my birthday for marketing purposes.
Oh, all marketing is pornography. I caught that earlier. So
Yes,
Susanna's saying that the book isn't showing up on Amazon. I would ask your local bookseller to help you get it, or Aubrey, who's on the call with us helping out today, can make sure you get that.
Or they can call Design Learning and get a cheap. Design Learning sells it cheaper than most places. So designlearning.com, and then call me if you can't get the book. That's scary.
Yeah, I'm sure that it's available. Sometimes it's hard to wade through the old editions and the new editions. So yeah, thanks. And Maggie is sharing the link to designlearning.com. And it is on Audible. And everyone wants to advertise for you, Peter. And
nice.
Kristen France is helping out with the link to the new edition. So thanks, Kristen. So we do want to give you a chance to come on camera and talk live with Peter about any questions that you might have been putting in this fast moving chat that I can't quite read all of while I'm trying to attend the conversation. So if you are interested in coming on camera and speaking with Peter, if you can let me know that in the chat window, I'm watching it and I will bring you on. I have one person with their hand raised. Byron, would you like to come on camera? I'm gonna invite you. I'm gonna promote him to a panelist. Welcome to Byron Ernest. He's from Indiana. You're gonna need to unmute yourself, sir.
Hi, Byron.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Above average.
Well, there you go. And Becky, I just want to say thanks for having this as well. This is great. Peter, you've been an idol of mine for years with your books. And so my question, to get right to the point, how do you scale as a public policy maker, and I'm on our state board of education, and this past year we did some tremendous work around graduation pathways for kids. And when we used the panel, I used a lot of your community work and the World Cafe type ways of setting up. And believe it or not, got criticism for that, like you were talking about. How do we scale to a public state policy or even a national policy, the work that you're doing that I know in your book you say policymakers and public leaders should be conveners and not problem solvers? How do we scale that and help to get everyone on board with that?
Anyway, thank you, Byron. Thank you for what you're doing in the world. You're a public servant, and God bless you for that, really. because you're helping restore the commons, which to me is the bigger job for all of us. Why do any of this? Well, to get the common good, restore the commons, common interest. It's been under assault for a couple hundred years, and it's time we claimed it back in a gentle way. And, I would start with the language. So the word scale means I take something and make it wide and large. I would say, how do you aggregate what you're learning in the systems that you're touching? So when I aggregate things, I bring things together that don't have to be alike. I can legislate a certain level of convening, but it's more think of yourself, how do we aggregate people who are co-creating what education that works for all, whatever language you have. And so you begin to bring them together from around the country, and you get them talking to each other, and you have the methodology with World Cafe or all the large group methodologies or open space, and say, this is what we're going to do. When people want scale, you say the fastest thing we can do is begin investing time, money, and later the legislation always follows the innovation, the experience. You can't innovate through legislation. You can innovate through experience. And so, Frances Strickland, who you know about, the governor's wife in Ohio, used to be. There's all kinds of people that are radicalizing education. So let's find out who they are and publicize. How do you make visible the people that are doing something important, but not with the idea of replication? And I can give you, places in Lexington. There's a guy just made school superintendent that are creating houses. And he's got using the small group. So every morning they meet as a small group. There's a place in Mount Healthy in Cincinnati. And they have aggregated by levels, by ages. So we're not age segregated inside. These are simple things that you can expose people to, and then hope in Indiana somewhere you'll say, who wants to participate with us in making it real for you? And that's scaling. Otherwise, you get into a funny kind of position of saying, what can we as a state legislature or public policy do? And then you start standardizing things. You have a core curriculum, is death to learning. It's great for consistency and control and predictability, just using your world of education, but it's not good for learning. And same with, STEM and all this stuff. It's a nice intent. Am I responding in any way that's useful to you, Byron?
Yes, you are. You've given me a lot to think about. I appreciate that.
Okay. And how's this session, this webinar going?
Very good. This is awesome.
Okay. I love you. I mean, to go first, and especially when you're backlit, so I can always see you. That takes courage.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Thanks, Byron.
Thanks, Byron. So if there are others who would like to come and be on the line with us, I can invite you as a panelist. In the meantime, we do have a question of Wade, a very deep one. What is the real purpose of community? And I've got a bunch of people with their hand raised.
Okay, let me respond. The purpose of community is to construct in the world the experience of freedom and accountability. That's what it works for. That's what social capital does. And so, I can take it whatever I'm interested in. If you're interested, it doesn't matter. But basically, for me, I stay interested in, because I know that much of the violence, that diaspora, the migration of populations are born of the absence of community. And the colonialization of solutions, like development. The notion that we're going to develop a city, develop a neighborhood, that really means we're going to let rich people build some really pretty buildings. And so community is an alternative to colonization. And I don't know how democracy exists if you and I don't trust each other.
That helps. So I'm going to try something that seems fun, Peter. I'm going to invite three people that have their hands raised to come on camera all at once. So I'm going to invite Ed and Leslie and Joe.
Ed, shine. You know.
And here we go. So we have a few guests. if you want to turn your camera on, Ed, you're welcome to. And it looks like we have another person who wants to be a panelist. So
Hello, Ed.
we've got a few of us here, and I don't know who wants to go first, but I thought it might be fun. We said we wanted to do messy. This is our own little small group.
Well, I'm not Leslie. I'm Lou. I'm not sure how I got confused with Leslie.
We knew that.
Hey, Peter, I first met you in 1997, I think, at the School for Managing in Jackson, Michigan.
Oh, wow.
And back then, you were thinking about community. You were taking us out of our tables and having us come down to one end of the room and just sit around in random seating any way we wanted to. So. And I've had a chance over the years to work with a couple of people like Joel Henning and Jamie Shokir, great guys who I think maybe have started with you. God rest their souls. So can you talk about how you went from the journey, you did a little bit earlier, the journey from technique to community, because you at one point back in the day you talked about strategy and techniques and those kinds of things, but you were already evolving towards community. What was that like? How did that happen for you?
I can make something up if you like. You know, I decided to leave the corporate world and get into the civic space. And I got invited by a bunch of city managers, and I fell in love with them because of what they cared about. And a part of it is to keep the roads running and the potholes clean. But they really cared about civic engagement. I just found there and they have lousy jobs. I mean, school superintendent and city managers are the two worst jobs in the world. And so I just got drawn into their world and tried to say, who am I in this world that can try to be useful. You know? So the community really came, and I didn't write it for 7 years because I hadn't experienced it. You know, thoughts, right. Most of them are useless. And so it was really my decision, you know, for my second half of life to say I'm going to care about neighborhoods. And I met John McKnight finally. He changed my life. And Mike Butler is a police chief in Longmont, changed my life. And then finally, Steve kept badgering me, why don't you write a book about it?
Thank him for us.
Well, you're very sweet. So why don't you each say what brought you onto this, to come forward for us? And I'll try not to say anything.
It looks like Ed is unmuted. So Ed, if you want to go first, and then we'll go to Jillian and then Joe.
Peter, it's such a pleasure to see you and hear you again. We go way back to tennis courts and tea groups, and I'm just struck by how we converge on relationship. Mm-hmm. You're calling it community, I'm calling it relationship. You're calling it small groups getting together. My son and I have formed a mini community to write a new book about recreating the concept of leadership, and it ends up being all about getting more personal. So I just
great
want to reinforce what you're saying, and I'm delighted that you're doing it.
Great to hear you and see you, and you launched me in this world. You know, your early work about process and stuff gave me something to hold on to. We were running these stupid tea groups, which is a great entry-level job because you sit there and you say, okay, what you do is up to you, and then you shut your mouth. It's the easiest opening line. And then you're terrified for the next 5 days because you don't know what the hell's going on. And you gave order to that, Ed, and I'm always grateful to you. And your book on humility, beautiful. Leadership is about humility, not role modeling. And what you and your son have done is just awesome. So thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you, Ed. Jillian, did you want to share?
Yeah.
Why is it important for you to be here today?
Hi, I am a young community builder. I'm 24. I'm based in Brooklyn in New York City.
Wow, I was just there.
I just joined a writing program for first-time authors, and I'm writing a book about how to create belonging in an increasingly not religious world. And the book concept is very new, and I'm still trying to figure out what book I really need to write. So I'm curious, what book about community do you think needs to be written right now that you're not already writing yourself?
Yours, you won't know what the book is about till after you write it. So don't fret. And write your book to the most naive, simplest person that you know. Don't write it to Ed and I, or it'll come out as garbled junk. And don't write it for peers. And Brooklyn, I don't know what's needed. What I do know is that what the work we're all doing needs to be made visible, because nobody considers it news except us. And that's what breaks my heart. So journalism, we need a journalism that covers and says what Ed says and what you're saying, that relationships may be the point. It's getting things done. That leadership needs humility. And just the fact that you showed up, you signed on, you raised your hand. Give me one sentence as to what you think is the strongest point your book might express, without any reservations, explanations, or background. Save those for your parents.
Are you asking, or?
I am asking.
Yeah, I think the biggest point that I want to make is that people, I think, especially my age, are really passive in their gathering. They're waiting to be invited. And I think more people need to learn the skills and have the vulnerability to start inviting others.
Beautiful. Right. I love that.
So thank you for being an inspiration for me. I really, really appreciate it.
We are all waiting to be invited. And don't you for a minute believe the stories people my age have about people your age. There's no such thing as a millennial. There's no such thing as a gen this or that. Those are just marketing ploys. And so you exist as an invitation, and you know how to show up because you did it here. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Jillian. Joe, and then we have a few people waiting to join us. So after Joe, I'm going to dismiss you, beautiful group, and invite some other folks on.
Hi, Joe.
Sure. Hey, thank you for allowing me to be a part. I'm coming from a little bit of a different perspective. I've been a fan. I've read your stuff. I've been a part of the CCBA world and the asset-based world in some extent, but almost from a distance. I believe that God's put me here to be a bridge between those who don't understand that world and those who do. So what advice could you give me as a way to bridge that gap from those who want to provide an easy fix or an easy solution, to throw resources at a community, and to be able to help them understand that process of building community first and discovering assets and building those relationships. So what's the best way?
Do you have a church?
I do.
Pastor. Right.
I'm actually employed by the church. So
good, because you're the most educated and activists and paid people around to build community.
Right.
People like Jillian are having to wing it unless you talk somebody into supporting her. And so I think the largest audience for this book is the faith community, and sees these ideas as an embodiment of Old Testament, really. And so we don't have to argue about whether it's who's, represent who. I think the way you named it is perfect. How do you invite people who think others can be fixed into getting to know the people they came to fix? The churches in Cincinnati are proud of feeding 5,000 people a week, but they don't know who those 5,000 people are.
Right.
And if you ask the people being fed, what are you good at? You know what they're good at? Cooking. And so I think the way you framed it is your work, and I'm thrilled to have you part of this conversation.
Thank you.
I cannot serve or help anybody that I've not met and don't know intimately. And the idea that I know and you don't is the most colonial thing in the world.
Wow.
And so you just keep crossing bridges, bringing strangers together. And when they get in the room, make sure they're with each other and not the people they came with.
It's good advice. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all. Jillian, this is sweet, Ed.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm
Yeah.
gonna move all of you all out and move on to
Bye.
new ones. Bye. All right, and as I'm removing, I'm gonna add.
Is
Just
this
takes
messy
a
enough
few
for you,
clicks.
Becky?
It is so messy. It is so messy.
Gina. Hey, Doug. I just saw Ken Murphy.
All right, so welcome to all of you.
We still got Leslie, though.
Yes, and he's going, and here's
Okay, this is fine.
one more.
Deborah Chang.
Okay, so we have Gina, we have Doug, we have Michelle, we have Deborah, and Jillian's still with us. Oops. Okay.
We'll take her.
We'll take her. All right.
My daughter lives in Bushwick, Jillian. I should introduce you. She's 25. So why don't each of you say something about what led you to raise your hand here? Or a question and answer, it doesn't have to be.
There we go. And Jillian's back. So, okay, Gina, would you like to start? You're at the top of my screen. You're muted at the moment.
Sure, I can start.
Great.
So, first of all, thank you so much, Becky, for inviting Peter to be here. It's like, so this was the most exciting invitation I got all week. I just saw it, I think, yesterday on Facebook. I'm like, I can't miss a conversation with Peter, who I miss so much. So I met Peter first in 2003 at Benedictine University. I fell in love with Peter. No one was talking to him, so I walked down with my problem, which was I was working for Abbott Laboratories at that point, and he basically reframed my question, and I think I was in tears like 30 seconds later, right, Peter? And then it was, he was a friend of, also a friend of Pepperdine. So,
cool.
Yeah, so I'm here really, and I'm actually really exploring how we can keep people who work virtually connected. And that's the work I'm doing right now, because I too don't really want to travel as much. And my clients they're all traveling, so they're never face to face, or they're very rarely together. So that's what I'm learning a lot just from this Zoom call, because I think we can still do the 6 conversations on Zoom, and Zoom is really a beautiful platform.
And we offer it virtually, design learning. It's never the same. So anyway, nice to see you, Gina.
Great to see you too.
Your clients may be all virtual, but you need to do something wherever you're living that's not virtual. And it never pays as well as things you don't believe in. It's just the way the comp system works.
That's really powerful. So I'm going to flag that we're coming near to the end of our hour. So Deborah, do you want to share briefly?
Sure. So I'm here because I started reading Community 2 days ago, and I'm 20% of the way through, but half of the book is already highlighted. It really speaks to me. And my question is around this structure between having small groups, but still having them collaborate with one another or be part of this wider collective. Because I'm very afraid in the work I do with New York City education, which is where our district is larger than Miami, Houston, and Chicago combined, that we may start building community, but at a certain time, we need to break up into small groups. And we then recreate the silos that we're trying to solve.
That's a great insight. So you can't let the small group go on too long. And so say I've got 4 hours, I'll let a small group answer 2 or 3 questions, but then I got to break them up. Mm-hmm. Just for the reason, because they think, oh, don't leave us alone. Come on, we just fell in love. We just found each other. This is great. These are like-minded people. Well, give me more time. And I just don't tolerate it. I just make fun of them like I'm doing right now. Mm-hmm. I said, if I leave you there for another 10 minutes, you'll think you're the best damn group in the room. We can't stand that. And they say, I don't want to, I know. And what the point is that people can get connected and build community quickly, wherever, however they are. And maybe they do it. Each time you meet, you've got a new small group. Now, some people may organize by interests, mm-hmm. but you can't let them just do that. You keep breaking them with strangers. Well, what have I got in common with them? That's why we're doing this, silly. Because if one part of the system doesn't reach out and connect with the other parts, it just becomes another silo. Mm. And that's why I like this high school that's organizing people in houses, 120 each. And when they start the day, they're with every age group. And so, anyway, thank you for your insight, Deborah.
And as a follow-up, how do we do this over a long period of time, though? Not just...
Stay healthy. Just stay healthy. I don't worry about longevity. You can't, you got to build, if you build something strong enough and clear enough, it will last forever, or it won't. How do we sustain this is the wrong early question, because you start commodifying what you're doing and standardizing what you're doing, and that's death. It's good for the administrators and good for the press. But people say, how do you sustain this over a long period of time? Exactly. Why don't you join us and we'll figure that out together. And anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
So
that helps. Doug.
Doug, Michelle, yeah.
Hey, Peter.
Hi.
I just wanted to make the comment that since you visited our community, we brought a number of people together, leaders and community members of all sorts. And every time I think I need to bring you back, someone brings up the work that we did and brings up, brings the techniques or the questions into a meeting or the small group part. And so I just wanted to let you know that some of what we planted there still seems to be working here in Muskegon. And a lot of interesting things are going on. And I believe community is a really key word for this area. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. That's good to know.
I love all my Michigan friends are listening.
So what do you want to do with the time?
I'm letting it be messy. Messy means going 3 minutes over, so Michelle has a chance to speak, and then
I want to hear Michelle's voice.
Hey, hi there. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you, Peter. I just want to say how much I love you and your work, and it's just been so powerful for me and my community. So I'm in Oregon, and I've had an opportunity to present the 6 questions, the small group conversations in a couple different settings. And I'm just really excited about the dovetail between your work and that of social permaculture. And I wonder if you've had any opportunity to work with people in the permaculture realm, and how you find, do you get excited about it as well?
I know they're always in the room.
Yeah.
And the idea that people who care about the environment you can't separate these things. And it's about the common good, the methodology, what Doug talks about, and what Jillian's going to create somewhere and write about, is how do we care for the commons? And part of that is the earth, and part of it is our economics, and part of it is our old people that are lonely, and part of it is our children that are useless, and the safety of the willingness and the beauty and the aesthetics. And so it's wonderful to have these come together. There's only professionals would separate.
Right.
And that's your world. And you've got this small little drawing behind you that kind of screams to us.
Yeah, so that's my Pachamama mural. It's
that's awesome. Yeah. Don't tell me you don't believe in God. So that's awesome.
I do believe in her. I believe that she had a really good plan when she started this whole mess, and I'm very curious about how we're going to see our way through.
Well, we will, and you will.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks again so much to all of you who have joined us today, and Peter, for you participating in such a lively and energetic way with our group. We do have a few calls to action for you. If you'd like to learn some more from Peter Block, you can check out abundantcommunity.com. You can also look at designedlearning.com, and if you like, you can buy the book there instead of Amazon. We do encourage you, if you haven't already, to pick up a copy of the latest edition of Community, which is just released in the last month or so. You can also send all your well wishes to Peter for his recent birthday. And, I missed that at the beginning. So happy birthday to Peter over the weekend. And I could not get him to admit how many years old he is. but it's a few more than me, at least two. And again, happy birthday, Peter. Congratulations on the new book. Thank you to all of you who have joined us, and we look forward to chances to learn and grow with you in the future.
And also, Becky, thanks for letting people in like this. This Zoom technology is the best in my mind. Because it's so, and if you just, even as 4 people, you know, even in the group work, when you get the small groups back together, all you have to hear is from 4 people, and you hear the room. So the fact we had 8 people, we've heard the world. And so you're letting people's voice and face come in. It represents everybody. And so that's a radical act. And anyway, this has been a pleasure.
It's very powerful. Thank you so much. Take care,
You're
everyone.
welcome. God bless you all.
Thank
Bye.
you, Becky.